Ben de meslektaşıma Dr. Haynak Tóta teşekkür ediyorum. Şimdi oturmamızın son konuşmacısı Zsuzsanna Cziraki olacak. Haynak'a bahsettiğine göre veya gibi biz Szeged'de bir Osmanlı araştırma grubu oluşturduk ve en çok bu Viyana, Macaristan, tabii ki yani Avusturya, Macaristan ve Osmanlılar arasındaki diplomatik müzakereleri veya diplomatik ilişkileri üzere çalışıyoruz. Şimdi Tóth Haynak'ın tarafından birkaç kere zikredilen Simon Reniger çok önemli Köprülülerin döneminde uzun uzadıyla İstanbul'da hizmet eden bir elçi. Raporlarını neşrediyoruz. Bu bir buçuk sene önce başlayan bir proje ve onu bitirince yani bu çok önemli Osmanlıların tarihi için çok önemli bir dönemin temel bir kaynağı yani okuyucuya hazır verebiliriz. Şimdi Reniger Türkçe bilmeyen eskiden askerlik sınıfına ait olan bir kişidir. Niçin ve nasıl bu çok önemli bir ödeve seçildiği hakkında Zsuzsanna Cziraki tarafından bir tebrik duyuyorsunuz. Teşekkür ederim.
Firstly, I have to apologize because I don't speak Turkish. The reason why I'm the Germanist in the research group of Professor Papp. So today I'm going to speak about some special aspects of Ottoman relations towards Western European countries in the 17th century, namely to the Habsburg Empire, which included the Hungarian kingdom in the mentioned period as well. But first of all, let me tell you about the institutional framework of my investigations. I'm a member of the research group for the history of Hungary in the age of the Ottoman rule at the University of Szeged, Hungary, which currently works on publishing the regular reports of Simon Reniger, resident ambassador, so-called orator of the Habsburgs, at the Ottoman port in the period between 1649 and 1666. On the slide, you can see the main groups of archive sources in this topic. We do research in this archive material. All of these are from the Vienna State Archives. Now I have the opportunity to present you some of the research outcomes of the mentioned project, focusing on the election procedure of a resident ambassador to Istanbul. So, by concentrating on the example of Simon Reniger, imperial decision-making mechanism and preferences related to the selection and appointment of a resident ambassador of the Habsburgs to the Sublime Porte will be discussed today. The period this paper is focusing on, namely between 1647 and 1649, was marked with several changes in Europe. The Peace of Westphalia closed the era of the 30 Years' War, although European power conflicts, in particular those related to the Habsburg-French rivalry, remained partially unresolved. The Habsburg-Ottoman relationship was mostly influenced by the fact that the Habsburg monarchy, exhausted by the long, expensive and devastating war, was highly interested in the Ottoman peace. From Ottoman point of view, avoiding a new conflict with the Habsburgs was also a necessity due to an increasing governmental crisis and to the Kandyan War started in 1645. In order to conserve the peace, after the death of Sultan Murad IV in 1648, an extraordinary ambassador, a so-called internuncius, was decided to be delegated to Istanbul. He was Johann Rudolf Schmid zum Schwarzenhorn, former resident ambassador at the Sublime Porte. He was ordered to renew the Peace of Sogn between both rulers and to introduce a new resident ambassador of the Habsburgs in Istanbul. In 1648, the position of the Habsburg representative at the Sublime Porte had been vacant for a few months. The last ambassador, Alexander von Greifenklau, died in May of the same year, but his person became persona non grata already a year before because of his unclean financial transactions and of the suspicion of a murder. I would like to turn your attention to the circumstance that the imperial court in Vienna decided to delegate a new resident ambassador to the Ottoman capital already at the beginning of 1647, so already in the lifetime of Greifenklau, in order to replace him, to reform the Habsburg embassy in Istanbul, and to revitalize diplomatic relations to the Ottoman government. The death of the rather unsuitable former resident Greifenklau, whose job was taken over by the translator of the imperial embassy called Nikosio Panayotti, known as well as Nikosios Panayotis according to his Greek Phanariot origin, just underlined a great demand on an agile official. But who exactly was designated to become a resident ambassador in Istanbul and why? It is already well known that the final decisions in the Habsburg monarchy were made by the ruler himself in all cases of foreign affairs. Less known is the leading role of the Imperial War Council, so-called Hofkriegsrat, in preparing imperial decisions. Namely, there was a small group of councillors who had the competence to discuss and prepare decisions in Oriental affairs, for instance, in the case of the embassy in Istanbul. Archive materials highlight the extraordinary role of one person, namely that of the mentioned Johann Rudolf Schmid, who became a councillor of the Imperial War Council in Vienna after he had finished his ambassadorship as resident ambassador at the Sublime Porte in 1643. The reason for his leading role may have been his outstanding experience in Oriental affairs, his knowledge in Turkish language, which was apparently extraordinary among the ambassadors, and his diplomatic competences, which characteristics all made him an ideal officer in foreign cases, both as councillor and extraordinary ambassador, so internuntius. Schmid, already chosen for the mission of the internuntiatur, seems to have been entrusted with the selection of an appropriate resident ambassador as well. Viennese archive materials give an overview on the candidates and the most important characteristics which were suggested to make an ambassador fit for representing his emperor of the Sublime Porte as follows. In order to come closer to the selection criteria of a resident ambassador, we shall take a look on the list of the candidates for the ambassadorship. There are 4 persons who can be identified: Franz Paul Lisola, a certain Dr. Pfründ, Matteo Sturani, and finally Simon Reiniger. The first candidate I mentioned, Franz Paul Lisola, was an outstanding personality of Habsburg diplomacy who already represented imperial interest as the peace negotiations after closing the 30 Years' War, and who was decided to take over the embassy and replace Greifenklau in Istanbul already in the May of 1647. Nevertheless, as Lisola was designated to Poland instead of the Ottoman Empire, a new candidate had to be found, who was the so-called Dr. Pfründ. Very little is known about this person. He seems not to have been a diplomat of great format and didn't understand much of Oriental affairs, which finally might be the reason for turning away him, although his knowledge of law was underlined by the councillors. Pfründ was followed by the merchant and Habsburg's former secret correspondent in Belgrade, Matteo Sturani, a Ragusan citizen aged 60 who had already had contacts with Ottoman authorities. After all, he proved not to be eligible for the position because of his old age, bad state of health, and last but not least, because of his citizenship in a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire, so in Ragusa, by which his loyalty towards Habsburg might have been questioned. Above all this, the election of an appropriate person proved to be even more complicated, for the Habsburg government had serious problems with the financing of the ambassadors. It needs to be understood that the very reason why the War Council decided to send a double delegation to Istanbul was of financial character as well, namely the shared travel of both ambassadors, so of Schmid and of the new resident ambassador, was expected to be much cheaper than two separate journeys. Moreover, the lack of money motivated the decision makers at the imperial court to choose somebody who would be willing to travel together with Internuntius Schmid without receiving the usual remuneration for an ambassador. Regarding these difficulties, it is not surprising that after a year of negotiations, the War Council did not have a resolved ambassador delegate yet in the spring of 1648, although the Porte urged the erection of a delegation more and more. It was probably at the final moment that Schmid introduced the new candidate, Simon Reiniger, a no-name young man of Styrian origin, aged 31. Schmid introduced him at the War Council as a talented person, although without any diplomatic experiences or great reputation. Reiniger is known to have studied law and served in the 30 Years' War on the side of the Margrave of Baden. He spoke German, Italian, Latin, and some French as well. He seems not to have been a man of great incomes, as he agreed to be employed for the half of the salary usually paid for the Ottoman embassy. Due to Reiniger's inexperience and the lack of finances, Schmid suggested taking him as an interim agent to Istanbul till the War Council would be able to envoy a more qualified person. But this odd solution turned out as more than problematic, for after having arrived at Istanbul in February 1649, the leader of the delegation, Internuntius Johann Rudolf Schmid, had to answer the rather inconvenient question from the part of the Ottoman officials, who Reiniger exactly was in the delegation, whether he was a kapitiha, so kapuketudashi, or not. Straitened by the Ottoman authorities, Schmid suggested in a letter on the War Council to introduce Reiniger compulsorily as a resident ambassador. The councillors and the emperor himself followed his advice, which finally led to the proclamation Reiniger's for a fully credentialed ambassador Habsburgs at the Sublime Porte at the beginning of the next year. The way and background informations of the decisions in the Vienna War Council briefly depicted above show some crucial points of the selection procedure related to the election of a resident ambassador. Now, it is possible to highlight only a few of the most important preferences in the case of an ambassador designate. On the one hand, the list of the required competences revealed here proves to be very interesting. Surprisingly, Turkish language skills and Oriental experiences were not primarily necessary for the ambassadorship, while the candidate must have been a loyal dependent of the emperor and was expected to be aware of international law as well. According to the characterizations of the candidates, marriage, children, or any health problems seem to have been disadvantageous for an ambassador. On the other hand, he should be able to manage financial problems which constantly set back the functioning of the embassy. Reiniger's example illustrates the difficulties the Habsburg government faced when appointing a qualified and talented person for the less prominent position of resident ambassador at Istanbul, a remote and alien place from the point of view of the Habsburg Empire, with unusual living and working conditions for Western European people who were usually so far from the Ottoman reality. Considering the long and successful career of the nearly accidentally elected Simon Reiniger, he served till 1666, The most important feature for a resident ambassador was mainly to be able to adapt and improve. Thank you for your attention. Çok teşekkürler.
Zsuzsanna Cziraki'ye ben de teşekkür etmek istiyorum ve şimdi bu ikinci oturmayı kapatacağım. Kapatmadan önce sadece en son bir cümleyi söylemek isterim. Gördüğünüz gibi Szeged'de genel olarak Macaristan'da tarihçi aşağı yukarı bu şekilde yapılıyor. Yani biz de Osmanlı tarihi üzere yaparken sadece Osmanlı kaynakları değil, bizim Macar kaynaklarımızı, Avusturya'daki Almanca kaynakları, Latince kaynakları biz bir araya getirip yani beraber kullanmaya çalışıyoruz. Ve şimdi kadar duyduğumuz makalelere merhum Tayyip Gokbilgin'in faaliyetlerine yani bir bakış verirsek, o kendisi aynı şekilde Osmanlı tarihi üzere çalıştı. Demek ki yani biz de siz de bu şekilde onun izninde yürüyoruz, devam ediyoruz. Çok teşekkür ediyorum.
Hocalarımıza çok teşekkür ederiz. Sempozyumumuz 1 saatlik aranın ardından 3. oturumla devam edecektir.